Hi, it's Sylvester, and if you're new here, I went through psychosis. It was really extreme. I experienced some very extreme delusions. I was hallucinating. It was really bad. It was really traumatic. Wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. I lost years of my life to psychosis. And I know I talk about it a lot. If you are somebody here who's been here for a while, then you might be sick of hearing me talk about the psychosis, but it was a significant chapter of my life, and talking about things, I find talking about things to be very therapeutic, and so I just wanted to talk some more about it, because in the past I made a video saying that I missed having voices in my head, and that's true to a certain extent, because the voices in my head, 99.9% of them were not good. They were abusive. They were hurting me. It was not fun. 99.9% of the time, it was not fun. But there was that small percentage of time where sometimes it was fun. Sometimes it was enjoyable. Sometimes the voices in my head were nice to me. Sometimes I considered them to be my friends. And I know that they weren't real, but it felt so real at the time that it's hard to not miss some of these voices in my head, the ones who were my friends. You know, every once in a while I'll catch myself thinking, oh, I wish so-and-so were here. They would really enjoy this. Or I wish so-and-so were here. They'd comfort me right now. Or something like that, where I miss people who never existed. I miss these relationships that never existed. And I have to mourn the loss of these friends who, again, were never real to begin with. And it's really hard to explain that to people, but, sometimes I do miss the voices in my head, certain voices, not all of them, but just some of them, because, again, some of them were nice to me. Sometimes I also miss it because I went from hearing voices 24/7 to my brain being completely quiet, and that was really difficult for me to adjust to. That was a very lonely period of my life, because again, I went from having voices in my head, feeling like I was never really alone, to just feeling like I was incredibly alone all the time, and it was really difficult to deal with the silence that came along with no longer having voices in my head. And again, sometimes I do kind of miss it. I'll be sitting by myself feeling lonely and think like, God, I kind of wish I had voices in my head right now. And then I'll catch myself and remind myself of how bad it was and be like, no, I don't actually want that. I really don't want to have voices in my head, because it was very traumatic, not just for me, but for my loved ones, the people around me, my neighbors. It was not fun. You know what I mean? Being around me at that time must have been scary for people, because I came off as quite normal. I masked my psychosis pretty well most of the time. Every once in a while I would make a batshit crazy video on YouTube, but for the most part, I was psychotic for many years. And again, for the most part, I did a really good job of pretending that I wasn't. When I was around other people, I acted normal and I kept my mouth shut. I knew not to bring up the stuff that I believed because it would freak people out. I knew not to act a certain way, not to act psychotic. I knew how to pretend that I was normal. And I think that scares people, because you can't really tell when somebody's psychotic. Sometimes it's sometimes it's really hard to know if somebody is psychotic. And so people, and I've made a video talking about this before, but people don't know. It's impossible to know whether or not I'm still psychotic, because for all you know, I could be psychotic and I could just be lying about it. I could just be making all of these videos talking about how I used to be psychotic, when in reality, I might still be hearing voices. I might still be, believing things that are not true. I might still be delusional. It's impossible to know. So I feel like I scare people for many reasons. But I think one of the biggest reasons why I scare people is because they can't be certain that I'm not psychotic anymore. And I get why that would be scary. But again, there's nothing I can really do to prove that I'm not psychotic. You just kind of have to take my word for it. And that sucks. That sucks because you never know. You never know what's going on inside someone's brain. And so, yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Stay frosty. Bye.